So we come to a very critical stage in opening up of psychoanalysis, the case of NRO. In history of psychoanalysis, this is a landmark case, the first case recorded by Freud, where he deployed the technique later on to be known as psychoanalysis. And you can see in this case, he is using hypnosis to a great extent. So this is a case where Freud is yet to make a transition fully from hypnosis to free association. So let us look at this landmark case of NAO. And every therapist has the first case, right? It's almost like the case of NAO. So NAO, of course, the real name we don't know, it's confidential, but Freud gave her the name NAO. She was a very intelligent girl, very compassionate, very sensitive, and because of this intelligence, she was not easy to give suggestions in hypnosis. She was not easily suggestible. This was the broad contours of the personality, and very important element in her life was a very strong absence of sexual and romantic life. So she was living in very Puritan times, very Victorian times, and as a girl of a good family, she was trained in that way, and a very harsh superego, and she had a marked absence of romantic and sexual life, and a very voracious appetite for dreaming. She would dream most of the times, and she would dream about fairy tales and all sorts of dreamy stories. And Freud says you can divide the case of NAO into three parts. July 1880 to December 1880, the phase of incubation. From December 1880 to December 1881, the manifestation of the illness, second phase. And from December 1880, January 1882 till end of 1882, gradual cessation of the symptoms, the cure. So you can divide the case of NAO into three phases. The first was incubation, second was manifestation, third was healing. And her problem was this: the manifest hysterical sickness included all of this. She had paraphasia, meaning she was not coherent, and she would lose certain words, she would lose language, she could not express certain things. So paraphasia was one. She had vision disturbances. At times she could see clearly, at times she could not. There were many different forms of localized paralysis in the body, and she felt contractures at various parts in the body. We'll see the details of all of this when we read the case, but this was the broad contour that in today's language we would call it a case of psychosis, of conversion sickness, conversion disorder, as well as somatization. So we'll also see when we read the case how the language has changed over the last century. So she had all these problems, and Freud and Brewer, initially Brewer and then Freud, started treating her. And during the treatment, when it was on, the father fell sick and the father died. And this was a very important event in the course of the whole therapy. And after the death of the father, she started presenting some chronic symptoms and sleepwalking. And then over a period of time, the symptoms started ceasing because of the treatment. what was important was this. She was attending to a sick father, and she was terribly afraid of losing the father to whom she was very strongly attached. So this was a very traumatic thing for her to see. She used to live in two states. In some states, she was herself and she would act like a reasonable person. In some states, she would act strange. So in some state, like she was a German speaking person, but she would go into a state where she would forget German and start talking in English. And everyone around her would find it difficult to talk to her in English because they were not used to it. There were states of absences where she would not recollect anything. So she would go into that state, do something, be there, and when she comes back into her normal state, she would not recollect anything of that state of which she used to call the state of absences. Right? Often she found herself to be offended, but she would not speak out. So the rage would be inside of her. One example is what I had stated before. She went to a friend of hers who offered her a glass of water in the glass in which the dog had sipped water a few minutes before. She had problems where after talking to Freud and after integrating some of the unconscious material, the symptoms would slowly disappear. So one such conversation we will see, after which the left extremities started feeling good. And slowly over a period of time, she started integrating the two states. So while she was in the state of absence, slowly the presence would come in and she would be able to integrate that state into the normal state. And before the last phase of her healing, some more childhood material came out after the death of her father, and she had to go through some depressive phase and some outbursts before the curtain fell and symptoms started residing in a real fundamental way, and the healing became more enduring. So this was the case of NAO, and you can see Freud deploying hypnosis and deploying free association. So we will see how this landmark case started the whole investigation of psychological roots of biologically manifest symptoms. And for psychoanalysis, of course, this became the founding case. The first important documented case in the history of psychoanalysis, at least the most popular one. So let us look at the case of NAO. Let's first do the preliminary communication and then go to the case of NAO. Did we start preliminary communication last time, or have we not started?
We read the forward, I think.
Okay, okay. So let's start with preliminary communication. Can anyone read it so we can discuss as the points come up? Anyone, Dhruval or Kiona, would like to start? You can take turns.
Okay, I'll start. On the psychical mechanism of hysterical phenomena, preliminary communication. A chance observation has led us over a number of years to investigate a great variety of different forms and symptoms of hysteria, with a view to discovering their precipitating cause, the event which provoked the first occurrence, often many years earlier, of the phenomenon in question. In the great majority of cases, it is not possible to establish the point of origin by a simple interrogation of the patient. However thoroughly it may be carried out. This is in part because what is in question is often some experience which the patient dislikes discussing, but principally because he is genuinely unable to recollect it and often has no suspicion of the causal connection between the precipitating event and the pathological phenomenon. As a rule, it is necessary to hypnotize the patient and to arouse his memories under hypnosis of the time at which the symptom made its first appearance. When this has been done, it becomes possible to demonstrate the connection in the clearest and most convincing fashion.
So we can see here, the core of psychoanalysis is slowly coming up. That there is a symptom which looks strange, which looks independent and disjointed, which the person is not able to connect consciously to anything that he can recollect. But in the unconscious mind, which at this point Freud is trying to reach through hypnosis, you can have a connection between something which is completely strange and something which is deeply emotional to the person. Take Jung's case, the mad woman, right, as the world would call her, doing the stitching movements day in and day out, in which no meaning could be found by others, right? But those who deployed psychoanalysis, particularly Jung, he could see the meaning of what she was doing. He could see the suffering behind the seemingly psychotic action. That it was a sort of a fixation in a trauma. And the repetition was because that affect could not be fully processed. So here we see that whatever the symptom is there is a story behind the symptom. The story is usually unconscious and the person does not remember the story. It is too early or too repressed. Okay. Any doubt on this?
No.
This is where we always play the Sherlock Holmes, that the symptom is something, right, and the cause is something. For example, the Freudian explanation for delusion of paranoia would be in homosexuality. Now, it's very difficult for anybody to connect the two. Or for generalized anxiety disorder, the Kleinian explanation would be loss of the good breast in early life. It's very difficult for people to connect that I start developing a symptom at the age of 20, that I start feeling fear. I have generalized anxiety at the age of 20. And how is it connected to something that happened when I was 6 months of age? So this is the uniqueness of psychoanalysis and also a point on which people criticize psychoanalysis. That we work too much on inferences, too much on summary of clinical experiences and too less on empirical data. Yeah, please go on.
This method of examination has in a large number of cases produced results which seem to be of value alike from a theoretical and a practical point of view. They are valuable theoretically because they have taught us that external events determine the pathology of hysteria to an extent far greater than is known and recognized. It is, of course, obvious that in cases of traumatic hysteria, what provokes the symptoms is the accident. The causal connection is equally evident in hysterical attacks, when it is possible to gather from the patient's utterances that in each attack he is hallucinating the same event which provoked the first one. The situation is more obscure in the case of other phenomena.
So you can see here, the person is fixated unconsciously in that event. And the same event is somehow playing up in some disguised form in every attack of the same thing. And therefore, this may become a pattern, and the pattern may travel from person to person, event to event. Can you think of how it can happen? That an event can create a pattern, not only affect, but actually a pattern, and the pattern can travel to other people, other events, and create more effect.
Yeah, I can't think of an example.
Let us take the very common example of the problem of triangles. Very few people are comfortable with a triangular situation in relationships.
Okay, so every time such a situation arises, no matter the actors of the triangle change, but the feeling remains the same.
Yes. So the first time the triangle created was in the Oedipal phase, and the person lost out the desired parent to the other parent. So the template which was developed is this, that if my object of desire is in any sort of relationship with another person, I will lose out in that triangle and I will lose my object of desire. So the only way for me is not to have a triangle and to have a dyadic relationship with people. Because the object of desire of mine, if he talks to anybody else, over a period of time, we will get close and I will lose. So the template is collapse the triangle into a dyad. This is the pattern. So now what happens? The person grows up and the person falls in love or gets married, and the husband has a friend or the wife has a friend. So again, the same triangle is created and the same anxieties come up, and the earlier pattern now starts working. That in this triangle also, the other two will get close, I will lose out, I can't win, I can't sustain. So now the pattern which was created in the first experience becomes independent of the experience and starts traveling and applying itself to all other triangles. And in the new triangle, if a feeling of loss and pain is created, that loss and pain gets linked to the Oedipal loss and pain. So let us say you fall in love at the age of 25, right? And your lover has a friend of your gender, and a triangle is created, and then you start feeling anxiety and the fear of pain, and let us say the person actually gets slightly close to the other person, huge amount of pain is created. So initially the pattern was working, now the pattern actually has come true because of reality. The real effect has been produced, but this effect gets connected to the earlier effect, and therefore the effect is felt far more than the effect you should feel as an isolated incident, because this incident gets connected to a much earlier incident, a very powerful incident. So the pattern is traveling, the pattern is creating new effect, and these effects get connected to each other, and the collection of effect becomes unbearable. Is it clear or is it confusing?
No, it's clear.
Dhruval, is it clear?
Yes, yes.
So we see in early life, a traumatic event happens, and outcome of that traumatic event is, number one, affect is created and the affect is repressed or somatized or both. Second, pattern is created, and the pattern,
It's like a memory. It's like a memory foam pillow. Like it keeps.
Yes.
It
True.
takes the shape in your mind.
True. That's a good example. It actually shapes the way we are.
Right.
Yeah, please go on.
Dhruval has left the meeting.
He's on the job, so I think he'll
Okay.
come in. Yeah.
Okay, I'll continue. Our experiences have shown us, however, that the most various symptoms, which are ostensibly spontaneous and, as one might say, idiopathic products of hysteria, are just as strictly related to the precipitating trauma as the phenomena to which we have just alluded and which exhibit the connection quite clearly. Can I read that again? I think.
Yeah, please.
Our experiences have shown us, however, that the most various symptoms, which are ostensibly spontaneous and, as one might say, idiopathic products of hysteria, are just as strictly related to the precipitating trauma, as the phenomena to which we have just alluded and which exhibit the connection quite clearly.
What we're saying is, our experiences have shown that the most various symptoms, this is like English of his time, right? The most various symptoms which are ostensibly spontaneous. So they appear spontaneous, autonomous, independent, but they are not independent.
Right.
They appear like idiopathic products of hysteria. Idiopathic means whose cause we cannot ascertain.
Right.
So these symptoms appear like independent, autonomous, without any cause that we know. But it is not so. Actually, they are all related to the traumatic event.
Yeah. The symptoms which we have been able to trace back to precipitating factors of this sort include neuralgies and anesthesias of very various kinds, many of which have persisted for years. Contractures and paralysis, hysterical attacks, and epileptoid convulsions, which every observer regarded as true epilepsy, petit mal, and disorders in the nature of tic, chronic vomiting and anorexia, carry to the pitch of rejection of all nourishment, various forms of disturbance of vision, constantly recurrent visual hallucinations, etc.
So he is listing out various forms in which hysterical problems occur. So he starts listing out neuralgias, so problems related to pain of nerves, anesthesias, where certain parts of the body just go numb and no biological cause can be found. And this continues for years. Contractures, spasms which happen, contractures which happen, paralysis, localized or maybe spread out, epileptoid convulsions, the whole convulsion of the body or part of the body. Petit mal means there is a forgetfulness of certain states. Nature of tic disorders, where certain actions are done by the person repeatedly, like raising of the eyebrow or doing certain things, a particular movement of the body obsessively. Chronic vomiting.
Like the example that you gave about that lady doing that stitching action.
Yes. Many people do the eyebrow movement repeatedly.
Right.
Many people do this lip movement like this repeatedly.
Yeah.
Some people have this habit of doing this to the hair. There is a special name for it. I think it's ticketolomania or something.
Okay.
You constantly keep slightly pulling the hair or playing with the hair all the time.
Yeah.
Chronic vomiting, anorexia, right? Disturbances of vision, constantly reoccurring visual hallucination. So you see this entire category of problems he puts under the name of hysteria. Today we would put these problems into different categories. Right? So we put anorexia in a different category. Right? We would put epilepsy in a different category. We would put hallucination in a third category. But at that point, when psychoanalysis was just developing, and this is much before even DSM-1 came in. So at that point, it was just a wholesale categorization of problems. So the disproportion between the many years duration of the hysterical symptom and the single occurrence which provoked it is what we are accustomed invariably to find in traumatic neurosis. That a single event can lead to years of suffering. And that's the tragedy of the mind, right? That a single event can create tragedy which can last for years and years, maybe even a lifetime.
Right. So I have a very pessimistic question, so to say. So with science evolving, we are able to realize that at one point something that didn't have a thorough understanding and kind of understanding of the cure and cause and everything has now, after having evolved in our scientific approach to that particular, say, disease, we are able to find the cure for it. So is it possible that and again, I think you will not like what I'm about to say, but is it possible that a psychosomatic disorder is nothing but a not thoroughly researched pending work?
In the current times, yes. In the sense, if you say that wherever we have a psychosomatic component of suffering, do we know the complete science of it and can we cure it in a predictable way?
Right.
The answer is no. But if you put the opposite of it, that is it that we don't know anything and we can't cure anything? Answer again is no. So we are in between. We don't have a exact cure like we have for malaria or typhoid, right? Where we can say take this medication, it will be off, or do this therapy for 2 sessions in this technique and it will be off. That kind of capability we don't have. But we are able to bring about definite change which can completely transform the quality of life of the person over a period of time. And how to shorten this duration of therapy, that is a point of research for many people. And there are 2 problems. One, the conceptual understanding of how it happens, and second, the technique and tools to heal. So the core problem is in understanding how it happens, less of a problem in technique and tools today, because on that point, in terms of technique, we have many options. On tools, psychoanalysis is extremely tool deficient. But in terms of technique, especially in the last 25 years, ISTDP and EDT and CBT have produced very good literature on technique front. So I think we are advancing fast, and next 10 years, particularly, I am very hopeful of certain breakthroughs. And the breakthroughs, I believe, will come from certain areas. One, the study of neurology and psychoanalysis together. Second, a development in the model of the mind and pathogenesis. And that, on my own contribution, and that in that will be development of model of the mind and healing of personality disorders. And my personal feeling is, in healing of the personality disorders, we'll also find a clue to healing of most of psychosomatic disorders. So I am very hopeful that in the next 6 months, at least in this year 2022, before this year ends, I should have very good insights and some sort of structure for personality disorders and psychosomatic sicknesses, which accelerate the process as we have it now even more.
Wow, okay.
Does it answer the question, or have I gone in circles?
Yeah, I think it answers the question.
Okay. Let's go ahead. Yeah, please.
Yeah, the disproportion between the many years duration of hysterical symptoms and the single occurrence which provoked it is what we are accustomed invariably to find in traumatic neurosis. Quite free. Yeah.
Yeah, please. Yeah, quite frequently.
Quite frequently, it is some event in childhood that sets up a more or less severe symptom which persists during the years that follow.
So you can see in case of personality disorder, something which happened in the first 2 years, people carry practically all their lives unless they go deep in therapy. Yeah. In Gujarati, there is a saying about this. They say, "Prana ne prakruti sathe jai." In Hindi it is said, "Prana aur prakruti saath mein hi jate hain," meaning thereby the core nature lasts lifelong. And when they say this, it is obviously for people who don't consciously work on themselves and don't go deep in therapy. If you don't do these two things, what happens in childhood by and large goes on in a fundamental way across much of life. And we can see this in many cases, our own life also. Many people who are our friends in the school, when we meet them after the college, you can still see the same person in the individual.
Yeah, true.
So something has endured for 20 years, 30 years. And in my case, when I meet my school friends, whom I know now for almost 30, 40 years, they are still by and large the same. Of course, with experience, everyone adds certain things. With age, you mature, all of that is true. But there are core parts of the individual which have endured intact over the years, unchanged.
Should I go on? The connection is often so clear that it is quite evident how it was that the precipitating event produced this particular phenomenon rather than any other. In that case, the symptom has quite obviously been determined by the precipitating cause. We may take as a very commonplace instance a painful emotion arising during a meal but suppressed at the time, and the producing nausea and vomiting which persists for months in the form of hysterical vomiting.
So you can see here that a painful emotion or a disgusting emotion can come up unconsciously during eating, and then somebody can develop hysterical vomiting and no biological cause can be found.
Yeah.
Yeah, please go on.
A girl watching beside a sick bed in a torment of anxiety fell into a twilight state and had a terrifying hallucination, while her right arm, which was hanging over the back of the chair, went to sleep. From this, there developed a paresis of the same arm accompanied by contracture and anesthesia. What does that mean?
She was looking after somebody, and during that activity, in a twilight state, she was in a reverie-like condition. She was almost feeling asleep with her hand on the chair, and this part was on the chair, so blood may not be able to go here. Right. So the arm was hanging over the back of the chair, went to sleep. The arm went to sleep.
Right.
And from there developed paresis of the same arm. So some problem of the same arm accompanied by contracture and anesthesia. So because the arm went to sleep, from there developed certain difficulty where certain part of the arm would not be felt as though it was anesthetized. Tried to pray but could not find words. At length she succeeded in repeating the children's prayer in English. When subsequently a severe and highly complicated hysteria developed, she could only speak, write and understand English while her native language remained unintelligible to her for 18 months. So this was one more manifestation. Another manifestation, the mother of a very sick child which had at least fallen asleep concentrated her whole willpower on keeping still so as not to waken it up. Precisely on account of her intention, she made a clacking noise with her tongue, a hysterical counterwail. This was repeated on subsequent occasion on which she tried to keep perfectly still and from which developed a tic, which in the form of clacking with the tongue occurred over a period of many years whenever she felt excited. So you can see there is a event where you do something which you are terribly afraid of doing, and the fear is lest it happens, and it happens. And then every time the same instance happens, it again reoccurs. A highly intelligent man was present while his brother had something hip joint extended under anesthetic. At that instant, the joint gave way with a crack. He felt a violent pain in his own hip, which persisted for years. So you see somebody and you feel fear, what if it happens to me? And then it starts there. Further instances can be quoted. In other cases, so these are instances of the symptom being literally connected to the traumatic event. Okay. So we saw in the presentation, there are three ways a symptom can develop. Three broad ways. One, connected directly to the event in some way. Two, through law of association, symbolically connected to something in the event. Three, connected in a deeper sense with some meaning. Right? There may be more ways also, but these are the most popular ways in which the symptom gets manufactured from the traumatic event. So the traumatic event is like the raw material. The situation, the environment during that situation, the traumatic event situation is like the raw material from which things are picked up and literally used or processed, and then something else is used. But this is how the symptom is manufactured. We have 1 minute to go. Should we take a break for 10 minutes, Kiona?
Yeah, sure.
So let's take a break for 10. It's 4:22. Let's get back at 4:35.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.